Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajarana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajarana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnu Par Paramansa Paravajakacharya Ussatara Sata Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Oh glories to the assembled devotees. Oh glories to the assembled devotees. Oh glories to the assembled devotees. Oh glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Oh glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 22, Text 32. Barismatim nama vibhur. Barishmatim nama vibhur. Yang nirvishya samavasat. Yam nirvishya samavasat. Tasyam pravishto bhavanang. Tasyang pravishto bhavanang. Tapatraya vinashanam. Tapatraya vinashanam. Pravishto bhavanam tapatraya vinashanam. Bahishmatim, the city Bahishmati. Nama, named. Vibhu, the very powerful Svayambhuva Manu. Yam, which. Nirvishya, having entered. Samavasat, he lived in previously. Tasyam, in that city. Pravishta, entered. Bhavanam, the palace. Tapatraya, the threefold miseries. Vinashanam, destroying. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Having entered the city of Bharishmati, in which he had previously lived, Manu entered his palace, which was filled with an atmosphere that eradicated the three miseries of material existence. Please repeat. Having entered the city of Bharishmati, in which he had previously lived, Manu entered his palace, which was filled with an atmosphere that eradicated the three miseries of material existence. Purport. The material world, or material existential life, is filled with threefold miseries. Miseries pertaining to the body and mind, miseries pertaining to natural disturbances, and miseries inflicted by other living entities. Human society is meant to create a spiritual atmosphere by spreading the spirit of Krishna consciousness. The miseries of material existence cannot affect the status of Krishna consciousness. It is not that the miseries of the material world completely vanish when one takes to Krishna consciousness, but for one who is Krishna conscious, the miseries of material existence have no effect. We cannot stop the miseries of the material atmosphere, but Krishna consciousness is the antiseptic method to protect us from being affected by the miseries of material existence. For a Krishna conscious person, both living in heaven and living in hell are equal. How Svayambhuva Manu created an atmosphere wherein he was not affected by material miseries is explained in the following verses. Om Jnanati Mirandisya Gyananganan Shalakaya Chakshurinman Utamena Tashmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai. So, there were three sort of points here that Prabhupada made that I wanted to discuss. Of course, we know, first of all, that the material world is full of miseries. There's no denying it. And I was just listening to a class yesterday where Prabhupada says, doesn't matter animal or human, the second the body comes, then there must be suffering. There must be pain and suffering. So the Lord also explains many times in Bhagavad Gita, there's verses about the sukha dukkha, happiness and distress, and dukhalaya ashashvatam. So this comes from the lotus mouth of the Lord. So it's not like the material world is not meant for suffering. It is meant for suffering. At the same time, sometimes you'll find that it's the Lord is saying that, He wants the living entities to be happy, and this is why all the saintly kings ruled so nicely, because they wanted the living entities to be happy enough to be able to have their needs met and to feel contented. But at the same time, the push is by those rulers and by Krishna himself through the heart is to elevate the living entity. Not that just we come here into a world of suffering and just have a good time. So then we have the adhyatmic, which is pain inflicted on the mind and the body. And it's often described that mental pain is more, there's more anguish in mental pain than there is suffering in the bodily pain. So the mind is, can cause excruciating pain for us. And as we know from Bhagavad Gita, that the intelligence should be able to control the mind, but unfortunately, especially in this age, it's very difficult for us to control the mind. So the intelligence is there to control the mind, but because the mind is so strong, that often does not happen. And Krishna also explains in the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna that Arjuna says, and the Lord acknowledges it's correct, that the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong. And we all know that. So then we have Adibautic, which is other living entities who cause us distress, the bugs and etc. Adidaivic is caused by the higher power, by the demigods, and we've had a lot of that around here lately. So those miseries, and actually I always liked Pira Krishna Maharaj. He said, well, there's a fourth misery, Adi-devotic. Because sometimes, that's our problem. So when I was contemplating that, reading this verse initially, I was thinking that, Swayambhuva Manu, it must be about having a very wonderful palace that's completely sattvic and beautiful, and so that therefore he doesn't feel the material miseries, but actually the mode of goodness is counted within that. So then I read further, and actually the whole influence of Swayambhuva Manu is devotional. He's just hearing. He's writing. It's to describe that he hears, he writes, he speaks about Krishna. So it wasn't that his palace is just so, gorgeous and opulent and sattvic, but also that he's always absorbed in hearing about the pastimes of the Lord. And that is the thing that removes us from those material miseries, which they're always pushing, material miseries. But it's that going within and being and using your thoughts for Krishna that is so strong in counteracting those material miseries. So as we know, Lord Chaitanya speaks about when he's talking to Rupa Goswami, and he talks about the side effects of devotional service. So the two side effects that he mentions are that the loss of upadhis or designations. So when we're performing service to Krishna, we're not thinking, if we're actually fixed and concentrating on our service, we're not thinking, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm black, white, this, that, the other. Those thoughts aren't there because those upadhis are being removed, and that is a side effect of devotional service. And the second one Lord Chaitanya speaks about is that the senses are becoming purified. So the Swayambhuva Manu had this perfect formula that he was just absorbed in hearing about Krishna all the time. He had brahmanas chanting and he was hearing the glories of the Lord constantly. So therefore, he wasn't affected by material miseries. Prabhupada talks about creating a spiritual atmosphere. And Srila Prabhupada's formula for creating a spiritual formula was always hearing and chanting. And he stressed hearing as the most important, because you have to hear to be able to chant. You have to hear nicely and then you can chant nicely. So I was contemplating that Swayambhuva Manu entered his palace and immediately those material miseries were switched off because he was absorbed. And we have the exact same facility as soon as we step into the temple. We have that exact same facility. Because here we're in a totally spiritual atmosphere. The temple, I know there's a nice lecture where Srila Prabhupada says in Melbourne, he said, don't think that this is Melbourne. Non-Melbournians always call it Melbourne. Don't think this is Melbourne. This is Vaikuntha. Because in Vaikuntha, everybody's after Krishna's service, everybody's after hearing and chanting. So that is exactly what we're doing here. He's talking in Melbourne Temple. So therefore, this is not Melbourne, this is Vaikuntha. And I've heard him in other lectures, he said, different places. He said, don't think that this place is geographically located, in its geographical location, it is actually the spiritual world. And sometimes he used that example of an embassy. You can go and take shelter of your own country embassy if there's some distress in another country, and you'll be under the laws of that embassy. So in the same way, when we enter Krishna's temple, we then can immediately transcend these upadhis, the miseries of the material world and the designations that cling to us so tightly. So when we are hearing, there's a certain mood that's very important to take on so that we get the full benefit of that hearing, and that is a respectful mood to whomever you're hearing from. So we saw that sometimes Srila Prabhupada was challenged. He was challenged in the West by people who didn't know what they were talking about, and drug addicted and so many things. And he was often challenged in India, but it was such a pleasure to see Srila Prabhupada when he was challenged in India, because he was so strong. You can hear those lectures in Bombay where people stand up and say, sprout their impersonalist things. And Srila Prabhupada was just so concise. He didn't allow, when he was answering somebody's questions, he stuck to his point. No matter they tried to push him here and there, he stuck to the point, and it was such a perfect philosophical point that they were unable to defeat it. So they would have to sit down and kind of eat humble pie. So it is important that we, have a mood of wanting to hear by being respectful when we are hearing. So I wanted to read a little bit about from the further on in this canto, actually. A very nice chapter that describes what Svayambhuva Manu was doing and how we do it. So this is 325.25. In the association of pure devotees, discussion of the pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and the heart. By cultivating such knowledge, one gradually becomes advanced on the path of liberation, and thereafter he is freed, and his attraction becomes fixed. Then real devotion and devotional service begin. And then Prabhupada talks about this mood that we have to have. It has to be in the proper mood, and he says, to understand the personal activities of the Lord, one has to seek the association of devotees, and by such association, when one contemplates and tries to understand the transcendental activities of the Lord, the path to liberation is open and he is freed. One who has firm faith in the Supreme Lord becomes fixed, and his attraction for association with the Lord and the devotees increases. Association with devotees means association with the Lord. The devotee who makes this association develops the consciousness for rendering service to the Lord, and then being situated in the transcendental position of devotional service, he gradually becomes perfect. So that's the formula to hear in that respectful, humble mood from the devotees, especially when you're listening to the pure devotees. It's very effective to the ear, and it goes through to the heart. So also in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, in the first verse, the purport Prabhupada says, as a devotee hears more and more about the Supreme Lord, he becomes enlightened. This hearing process is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The messages of the Supreme Lord are full of potencies, and these potencies can be realized if topics regarding the Supreme Godhead are discussed among devotees. This cannot be achieved by the association of mental speculators or academic scholars, for it is realized knowledge. The devotees are constantly engaged in the Lord's service. The Lord understands the mentality and sincerity of a particular living entity who is engaged in Krishna consciousness and gives him the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna in the association of devotees. Discussion of Krishna is very potent, and if a fortunate person has such association and tries to assimilate the knowledge, then he will surely make advancement towards spiritual realization. So again and again we hear about this importance of talking about Krishna and discussing Krishna, because there's so much to discuss, there's so much to relish. And as it's explained there, depending on our tendencies, Krishna's with us and he's seeing how to further us in our spiritual life, how to give us the association and the understandings that we need for our particular relationship with Krishna. So it's all very personal. Time and time again you come on these little descriptions in the Bhagavad Gita that explain how personal Krishna is and how he's always, with us and for us and trying to assist us. Once we take that step to turn towards him, then he's always helping in so many ways. And the nice thing also about devotional service is that the means and the end are one. It's not like we had this process that we follow during our sadhana years, and then things are going to change when the heart gets that connection to Krishna. It's not like those activities are just going to fly out the window. They remain. So the means and the end are one. And we saw Srila Prabhupada would get up and chant rounds, and, sing bhajans and so many things. It's not like he was thinking, well, I'm just going to write my books. And no, that process is there from start to finish. But as the mind and the heart become purified, it becomes more and more sweet and relishable. So here this is quoted in the Chaitanya Shikshamrita, but it's from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 11th canto. One should learn, chapter 3, 30-31 in the 11th canto. One should learn how to associate with the devotees of the Lord by gathering with them to chant the glories of the Lord. This process is most purifying. As devotees thus develop their loving friendship, they feel mutual happiness and satisfaction. And by thus encouraging one another, they're able to give up material sense gratification, which is the cause of all suffering. The devotees of the Lord constantly discuss the glories of the personality of Godhead among themselves. Thus they constantly remember the Lord and remind one another of his qualities and pastimes. In this way, by their devotion to the principles of Bhakti Yoga, the devotees please the personality of Godhead, who takes away from them everything inauspicious. So that's Krishna's kindness. When he sees that we're making that serious attempt and talking about him and relishing his pastimes, then he's removing the obstacles that are in the heart. It's a kind of a simultaneous, wonderful reciprocation that Krishna has with his devotees. So, and there's also statements, many places, that this transcendental knowledge that we're studying and trying to imbibe, it's ever fresh. You don't become satiated. Some people say, haven't you got anything else besides Hare Krishna? But we don't need anything else, and we're satisfied with Hare Krishna because the taste for that Hare Krishna and the taste for our understanding of Krishna and relishing actually is increasing. So there's a sentence in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto, 119 purport, where Prabhupada says, the light of transcendental literature becomes more luminous with progressive reading and realization. So, we understand things, little things, sometimes we get it, but there's so much more that we have yet to sort of realize. But as we go on, we get more understanding of even those basic points that we may have thought we grasped. By Krishna's grace, that comprehension and understanding grows. So it's just another wonderful facet of Krishna's kindness, that we have this reciprocation with the Lord, and that reciprocation grows. Of course, there's always times when we feel kind of blocked, and that's in a sense we cut that off because we feel blocked, and but because that process is so nice, because we go on chanting and go on hearing and go on associating and going on following this process that Prabhupada has given us, then those blockages, they'll clear. Maybe if there's a big blockage, it takes a while to clear. But this is that nice, wonderful quality of devotional service, that it is removing our upadhis, and it is purifying our senses. So, I actually was going to read something about the miseries of material life and how suffering is not a bad thing. So this is from the Jaiva Dharma by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he says, suffering and pleasure are different conditions of the mind. What we call suffering, another person attached to the same condition will define as pleasure. The final outcome of all material pleasure, however, is pain. The materially engrossed person accumulates only misery in the end, and upon experiencing the worsening of his situation, he desires undiluted, endless happiness. Intensification of this desire arouses his conscience and power of discrimination, leading to inquisitiveness and inquiry into the ultimate reality. The attitude of sincere inquiry leads to sadhu sangha, which bestows shraddha and thus installs the jiva on the path of self-elevation. Therefore, suffering is ultimately a boon. Impure gold is purified by firing and repeated hammering. Similarly, when the jiva is contaminated by the fancy to enjoy his senses to the extreme, making him turn away from Krishna, he needs to be purified by the fire and hammering of excruciating material experiences. In this sense, the sufferings of a gross materialist are auspicious and the mercy of the Lord. And they're also auspicious for us, because it's many times we learn through suffering. We don't seem to learn when everything's going well. We don't learn as deeply as when life, when things fall apart and life becomes very difficult. That's kind of like a more powerful way of us as foolish Kali Yuga living entities, Kali Yugaites, that we learn. We generally don't take the intelligent and fast way of learning, but when there's distress, and it's a hard thing when you're going through it to think, oh, this is good for me. But actually, when you get through the other end, it's like you can look back and think, that was really helpful. Because Krishna puts us always in a situation that is going to benefit us if we're on the lookout, it requires that consciousness to pick up that, yes, there's a really good lesson in this suffering for me. So the other point, another point Srila Prabhupada made is that human society is meant to create a spiritual atmosphere by spreading the spirit of Krishna consciousness. So because we have got this huge fortune in our lives, then we're always, the idea is to always feel grateful for that and to find ways to give to others, to spread this to others. Because if you have something wonderful, you want to share it with your loved ones. Normally, if you get something wonderful, you want to share it with your loved ones. But once you come to Krishna consciousness and you understand that everybody is a spirit soul and they all deserve this, then you want to give that. And that's so much the mood of all our acharyas. They want to give no matter what, you know. So the Prabhupada said, there were buckets of blood. I bled buckets of blood for every disciple. You know, so because he gave so much. But that's the mood of the devotees, that because we have something wonderful, we want to give that to others. And it's it's just like we got to experience that on Rath Yatra on Saturday. It was just so blissful to see all those faces, you know, the people coming along, and it just so happened at King George Square there was a voting, how to vote. Early voting was on, and all these how to vote people, and some of them were like dancing and chanting and smiling and laughing. It was so nice, you know. And it's always like that when you go out and sort of have a nice Harinam or Rath Yatra, and you've got the Lord there, and the whole atmosphere just, you know, gets pulled up by that Krishna consciousness and the holy name. And this is what Prabhupada wanted us to do, to create a nice spiritual atmosphere by spreading Krishna consciousness. And also Srila Prabhupada, his other point was that material miseries can't affect the status of Krishna consciousness. So I know that, I don't know if you've read the stories about the devotees, the Russian devotees, when they had to go to jail. They suffered so much, but they absolutely stuck to their Krishna consciousness, and they had their own, you know, they had many realizations when they were going through all that, and it was kind of like, you know, for them it was a very intense and difficult experience, but their gain was so great. And I remember even in the early days in Melbourne, two devotees went to Pentridge jail. That was Pandava and Kurma Prabhu. And there they were in jail. And of course, they wouldn't eat anything. They would only drink water. And in the end, then it was just for non-paid fines or something. They got taken off to jail. And devotees were a little bit remiss in those days about paying fines, etc. So they were there for 2 weeks, and then the people in the jail were so worried because they weren't eating, so they let them out. But they had a really nice experience in the jail because, you know, there they were. People were very respectful to them because they were preaching, and they really respected the fact that they weren't eating, you know, and so they got to do preaching in jail. And I know once when the first time I got arrested in 1972, there were a whole bunch of brahmacharis and myself arrested for chanting on the streets, and they took us off to jail. And I was the only girl, so I was in a different jail, and they were down the hall. But they started to have this rip-roaring kirtan. So it was really ecstatic, you know. I was singing in my cell and they were singing down the... That was really nice. So it's that mood that your Krishna consciousness cannot actually be affected by anything. And it's, you know, you feel like the mood can be affected by the status of what's going on, but actually that's not true. And we know that when, you know, like Srila Prabhupada, when he came to New York, everybody just could see he's totally transcendental, even though it was so difficult there. But he never ever diminished his Krishna consciousness. So, Srila, oh yes, I was going to say, in our homes also we can create a very nice atmosphere. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written this Shuddha Bhakata bhajan, where he describes various aspects going on in his home for Krishna. Like he's describing the holy days that he observes. His mind, when he visits the holy places, he'll go to Lord Chaitanya's places. His mind always wants to hear the mridanga and the kirtan. And then he sees the deities in his house and he feels the greatest joy. And he honors prasadam and he understands that is conquering all his worldly illusions. And then he says, Goloka Vrindavan appears in my home whenever I see the worship and service of Lord Hari going on there. And then he talks about the Tulsi tree, the holy Tulsi tree soothes my soul, for she gives pleasure to Lord Krishna. And so many aspects of his daily devotional service he mentions in this bhajan, because they're all connecting him with Krishna. And that's the idea, that we set up our homes to be with a spiritual atmosphere, to have the center as Krishna. Because that's what we want to do with our whole lives, have our center as Krishna. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur also mentions that in our homes, the presence of the books, like Srimad Bhagavatam, just to have those books in your home sanctifies your home. Because Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna. And, Srila Prabhupada did say sometimes, if you don't have deities, you can offer prasadam to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Because Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna. So when we have Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, all these wonderful books in our home, that's sanctifying our homes. Of course, most devotees have pictures of Krishna and deities, and that whole performance, every morning, every night, you're looking after your deities. That's, we're taking care of Krishna. That's what we do in the spiritual world. We take care of Krishna. So it's such a nice opportunity to conduct the activities that we will be performing in the spiritual world when we're worshipping our home deities. So we can create that atmosphere in our homes, and of course, in its ultimate, here we have, in the temple, we have the deities, and that's always the most special, to come and offer some service and do some hearing and chanting in front of the deities. So the idea always is that material miseries are there, connected with the body and with the modes. So if we're connecting with Krishna, we're not connecting with those things. It's just like, sometimes someone gave me the example the other day of when they're at the dentist, they wriggle their toes and think about their toes, so that they don't think about their teeth, what's going on in their mouth. And it's like that. When you are absorbed in Krishna, then those material miseries that are there, you're not identifying with them, you're not concentrating on them. They shrink into insignificance. So it's not like the material miseries aren't there, they're always going to be there. But we can make them insignificant by having our consciousness so much stronger on our contemplation of Krishna and our, thinking about his pastimes and talking of him and relishing and all those, following that process internally. So, we know that, for example, Srila Prabhupada, at the end of his life, he had no flesh. They were just like bones and skin. And the Ayurvedic physician that was taking care of Srila Prabhupada said to the devotees, that your spiritual master is burning. And they're like, what? He's burning at every moment. And they kind of couldn't understand. And he said that when there's no flesh like that, and the nerves are just on the bones, there's tremendous pain, like intense pain. And he said, I always give morphine to people when they're in this stage because they're screaming in pain, they can't tolerate it. But your spiritual master has not offered one complaint. So that's because he was fixed on Krishna. The pain was there, it was burning his body, but his consciousness was there fixed on Krishna. So it's really difficult for us to kind of be so fixed. But that is our goal, and the more we practice that, then the more our hearts become connected, because Krishna is very happy when we make an effort. He's happy, like the whole process that Srila Prabhupada has given us, that's pleasing to Krishna. And he sees, like he's there internally guiding us, and the Guru externally guides us. But he's seeing, when we make an effort, so many times things are difficult, fasting or... there's so many things that we find difficult. But when we make that effort, then Krishna's pleasure becomes evident. We get some reciprocation from him. So, of course, we know that at the time of death, we're going to, have the body turned upside down, everything going crazy. But the idea is that the mind has to be so trained up that it's used to thinking of Krishna that at that time we can grasp Krishna's lotus feet or Lord Chaitanya, whatever, however we like to worship Nityananda, Lord Nityananda, Lord Chaitanya, whomever we can take shelter of. So we practice that in our lives, and so that at the time of death, it's not so difficult. Like Prabhupada used to say, don't think that you can just not follow the process and remember Krishna at the time of death. It won't happen, because all the other attachments will come up very strongly at the time of leaving the body. Your attachments come very strong. So if your attachment is to hearing and chanting, your attachment is to Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan, the holy name, then that's what's going to come up, and we'll grab that. So we can use this life for that, for gaining that practice, for performing that practice, so that at the time of death, it's kind of very natural for us. Because all we want actually is to love Krishna, and all Krishna wants is for us to love him. But there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. So we have to be sort of vigilant to practice. And the best way to practice really is to find the things that most attract us about Krishna, the things that stand out for us, the devotional practice that we like to do. Maybe we love to hear, then we love to chant, we love to pray, whatever it is. We love to do deity worship. So whatever is very kind of meaningful for us, the more attachment we get to that service, then the more we're able to focus on that and focus on Krishna at the time of death. So, thank you very much. Please excuse me for any mistakes. Or does anyone have any comments or questions?
Mataji, thank you very much for the class. I've got a couple of questions actually, just in regards to the point that you made as far as if suffering comes, we should see it to make us stronger. In my work, when I do chaplaincy work with the Hindu community or the broader community, people often ask, why is this happening to me? why am I suffering like this? Why have I got cancer? Why have I got this? Why? Why is my child dying? Why is this? The answer, I can't give the answer of saying, well, you know that suffering that you've got at the moment, that'll make you a lot stronger. So in your opinion, what would be the best way to actually console that person with the miseries that they've got?
Well, that, like you're saying, the devotees feel like that suffering is, because they understand that connection. But if someone doesn't have that connection, it's not the same. They're not going to see suffering in the same way. But you know, that Satenu Kampam Susamikshamanam, that devotees see suffering as a blessing.
Yeah.
So that's not something that someone who's not committed is going to feel. But if they can get some concept of being a soul, you know, that some concept of eternality, and that you know, the son or whoever's got, or they've got, that the soul is going to move on. The soul is, or the life that they have is for them. Well, they can learn something. They can learn lessons from it. But naturally, it's a very harsh and, you know, terrible reality, painful reality for people who have suffering relatives and suffering themselves. But if they can just get some glimpse, at least that God loves them, you know, that they're a soul and God loves them. If they can understand that the God's within them, even the Christians understand that God's within them and that He loves them and He's with them, then, you know, then it's the body that's suffering, not the soul.
Do you bring up the point of karma?
Well, I guess it depends how advanced they are. If they understand, if they're Hindus and they understand, you can talk about it. But generally, people want to feel that the love, they want to feel love at that time. They want to feel the love of the Lord. And I guess that's what you can focus on. That.
But ultimately, from a Krishna conscious point of view, the miseries that afflict us is due to our karma. Is due to past actions. Would you agree with that?
Yes. But if someone doesn't understand karma, you can't hit them with that. They won't really kind of...
Well, they can sort of understand for every action there is a reaction. And so I've found personally that people are actually really attuned to that. They actually appreciate that. So it's something that I've done in the past. Yes, and you can atone for that.
Yeah.
The second part of my question is, if that is the case, that miseries come from karma, how is it that the pure devotee that comes here, the Sakshabesha avatar, is still stricken with miseries?
Well, they're absolutely given by Krishna to show us, like Srila Prabhupada's whole life was an example. And you go back to the Acharyas, their life is an example. So if we didn't see, like the fact that we saw Srila Prabhupada in that terrible suffering state, I mean, it was so shocking to see Srila Prabhupada all diminished body, but we also saw that he was on fire with his preaching. You know, that was the last time I saw Srila Prabhupada in his rooms in Bombay. He was just preaching like crazy, you know, and I was kind of so shocked when I went in and saw him like that. He didn't have his top on. He just had a lungi and he was on the bed and he was so diminished, and I just sat there in shock at with the life member that I was with. And then he started to say, "Oh, Swamiji, they've built the temple in the wrong direction, not according to Vastu." And Prabhupada said immediately, "Why don't you come and join us? Why don't you help these boys and girls? You know, they need people like you to help them." And then he said, "This preaching movement," and then he just started, and he was on fire. You know, it was just, he talked and talked, and I was told by Tamal Krishna, just light chit-chat, you know, 10 minutes, light chit-chat, but Srila Prabhupada just, and it was the most it was such an impressive thing for me. I could so see he's absolutely not the body. He's totally unaffected by what he's going through. Right. So it was like for an example. And so many at Prabhupada's pastimes that you hear, they're such a wonderful, devotees take away so many wonderful realizations from those pastimes. So what he went through to show us, how to conduct ourselves and how to remember Krishna and put Krishna in the forefront no matter what's happening in our lives. Because if it had have been all just roses, then we wouldn't have had that sort of personal vision to see how a pure devotee deals with things. And all of the things that Srila Prabhupada dealt with, there were so many things. He was trying to manage a whole society and, there were so many difficulties and challenges constantly, but the devotees saw how he rose above those challenges, how he dealt with people. So it was all for, it was to help his disciples and, to provide a wonderful example for us.
Thanks, Mataji.
Okay.
I feel like also what Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas, or any pure devotee that suffers in this material world, from our eyes suffers, it's proof of two things. That for us, when we devotees suffer, our understanding is we try to be, I deserve so much towards Krishna, I could have cut my arm off, but you just cut my finger. And we try and see it as a blessing. But for the Acharyas, the pure devotees, it's proof that, yes, they're showing us by example their level and their commitment to Krishna. And also, the Adhyatmik, Adhidaivik, Adhibautik, it's proof that in this material world is not where you belong. Even if you don't have any bad karma, Prabhupada didn't have bad karma, but he suffered. For us, when we suffer, it could be from karma or it could be from those three suffering miseries. But for Prabhupada, karma is ruled out. What's left is those three sufferings, which means this material world is not where we belong. Even he doesn't have any bad karma, but why is he so-called bad things happening to him? Is because he's at the end of the day, he's in this material world. So it proves that we don't belong here.
Yeah, very nice. So we've got to get out. That's what Srila Prabhupada wanted. Use this one life for Krishna and get out. So, hopefully we can do that. Thank you very much. Okay? Hare Krishna.